Fleet Admiral Craximus Vorthak had been enjoying what he considered to be a perfectly reasonable Tuesday morning when his chief aide, Blixnorp, burst through his office door with the kind of panicked expression that suggested either the universe was ending or someone had accidentally authorized military action against a protected species. The datapad trembling in Blixnorp's 18-fingered grip contained information that would make Craximus question everything he thought he knew about military protocol, intelligent life, and the fundamental nature of cosmic justice. The opening line of the report hit him like a neutron star to the face. Casualties from unauthorized Earth engagement. Complete obliteration of 4th Assault Fleet. Estimated survivors. 4 soldiers, 2 maintenance drones, 1 confused cook, and approximately half of a communications officer who refuses to explain what happened to his other half. Earth. Craximus felt his 3 hearts perform what could only be described as a synchronized cardiac rebellion. His morning stimulant beverage, a corrosive blend of caffeine and liquid antimatter that could dissolve most metals, slipped from his tentacles and began enthusiastically eating through his desk, the floor beneath it, and what appeared to be 3 levels of administrative offices below that. The screams, echoing up from the accounting department, provided an oddly appropriate soundtrack to his dawning horror. Nobody had authorized military action against Sol 3. The 3rd planet of that backwater solar system was classified as harmless agricultural species, suitable only for long-range mineral rights acquisition after natural extinction event. According to every intelligence report in the galactic database, humans were a primitive species whose greatest technological achievement was learning to burn fossil fuels in metal containers, and whose idea of advanced engineering involved stacking rocks in geometric patterns and calling it architecture. And so why, by all the swirling cosmic winds of the Andromeda Galaxy, were there 4,000 of his finest battle-hardened soldiers, now reduced to what the report cheerfully described as organic matter distributed across 3 continents with the consistency of particularly chunky soup? Blixnorp, a nervous Quilorian whose normal blue-green coloration had shifted to the sickly yellow-purple that indicated either severe indigestion or complete psychological breakdown, shuffled all 18 of his feet in what could generously be called a dance of anxiety. His voice cracked across several octaves as he stammered out the words that would haunt Craximus for the rest of his considerably shortened career. "Sir, there appears to have been a slight miscommunication in our translation protocols." Miscommunication! Craximus's bellow shattered 2 windows, caused his secretary to faint in the outer office, and triggered the building's earthquake detection system. "Blixnorp, my dear, pathetic excuse for an aide. A miscommunication is when you order grilled fish and receive roasted fowl. This is a complete military catastrophe involving a species that apparently builds their transportation devices out of refined metal and powers them by burning the liquefied remains of ancient organic matter." The chain of catastrophic events that had led to this moment, as Blixnorp explained with increasing hysteria, had begun 6 weeks earlier when General Vorthak, Grimblesnacks, a military officer of the old school who believed that when faced with uncertainty, the proper response was immediate and overwhelming firepower, received what he interpreted as a priority directive to secure valuable mineral assets from the hairless primates of Sol 3 through immediate military intervention. The original message, however, had been nothing more threatening than a routine geological survey request from the Department of Interstellar Resource Assessment, asking him to conduct a preliminary evaluation of asteroid mining opportunities in the outer solar system while maintaining absolute non-interference protocols with the indigenous mammalian population currently occupying the 3rd planetary body. But here's where the situation transformed from routine bureaucracy into cosmic farce. General Grimblesnacks had been using a translation matrix that was 3 software updates behind current standards, had been originally calibrated for Betelgeusian linguistic patterns rather than standard galactic, was running on a computer system that had been repaired twice using quantum-grade chewing gum, and what the maintenance log optimistically described as hope, and was being operated by a junior communications officer who had learned galactic standard by watching old entertainment broadcasts and was consequently convinced that all official military communications should sound like dramatic monologues from space operas. When the innocent survey request passed through this technological marvel, maintain absolute non-interference protocols somehow became initiate immediate subjugation procedures with extreme prejudice, while indigenous mammalian population was transformed into aggressive territorial predators, requiring immediate neutralization for the safety of galactic civilization. Grimblesnacks, being a product of the military academy system that taught its graduates to shoot first and ask questions while standing over the smoldering remains, had immediately dispatched his finest invasion force to Earth. 4,000 seasoned combat veterans armed with plasma rifles, force shields, gravitational disruptors, and enough firepower to reduce a moon to its component atoms, descended upon the planet with all the confidence of beings who had successfully conquered 17 star systems, subjugated 43 separate species, and hadn't lost a battle since the infamous vegetable rebellion of Sigma Centauri, which everyone agreed didn't count because vegetables weren't supposed to fight back. The first indication that this mission might differ from previous military operations came when Advanced Scout Xylothorpe transmitted his initial reconnaissance report. "Sir, the humans appear to have weaponized their atmospheric sound delivery systems. The noise is indescribable. 3 of our audio specialists have requested immediate medical evacuation, and Private Claxon has started writing poetry about the meaninglessness of existence." This atmospheric weapon turned out to be a 17-year-old human named Kevin Thunderbottom, who was playing something called death metal at volumes that violated several laws of physics from his bedroom window while his parents were at work. The sound, which apparently consisted of rhythmic screaming, accompanied by what could only be described as mechanical torture set to a beat, had caused 3 Quilorian soldiers to immediately surrender, claiming that any species capable of producing such horrific auditory assault as a form of recreational entertainment was clearly too psychologically unstable to engage in conventional warfare. The situation deteriorated with remarkable speed. The second wave of the invasion encountered what they reported as coordinated mechanized assault vehicles operated by juvenile humans in complex synchronized attack formations. These turned out to be a group of 10-year-olds on bicycles who had noticed the funny-looking aliens and decided they would be perfect for an expanded game of tag. The resulting chaos involved 2 hover tanks being driven into a municipal pond by children who kept shouting, "You're it!" in voices that somehow conveyed both innocent joy and absolutely terrifying determination, while remaining completely immune to threats involving plasma disintegration, molecular dissolution, or being reported to their parents. But the real psychological trauma began when the invasion force discovered that humans, when confronted with advanced alien technology, didn't respond according to any known pattern of civilized behavior. They didn't run screaming in terror. They didn't fall to their knees and worship the superior beings from the stars. They didn't even attempt to negotiate surrender terms or beg for mercy. Instead, they did something that struck fear into the hearts of battle-hardened soldiers who had faced the worst the galaxy could offer. They got curious. Within 6 hours of the invasion's commencement, a group of teenagers in Detroit had not only figured out how to hotwire a Quilorian fighter craft, but had also painted racing stripes on it, installed what they called a killer sound system, and were using it to deliver pizzas while playing music so loud it could be heard from orbit. The craft, which represented thousands of years of advanced engineering and had cost more than the gross domestic product of most planetary systems, was now advertising, "Tony's Pizza, we deliver anywhere in the galaxy, satisfaction guaranteed or your money back." Meanwhile, a retired mechanic in Ohio named Earl Boswick had somehow managed to reverse engineer a plasma rifle using nothing but spare auto parts, duct tape, and what he described as good old-fashioned American know-how. He was now using it to clear snow from his driveway with remarkable efficiency, while his neighbor Phil stood by drinking beer and offering helpful suggestions like, "Try giving it more juice, Earl, and maybe if you pointed it at my ex-wife's house instead." And somewhere in the swamps of Florida, a man known locally as Crazy Eddie Fernandez had attached Quilorian gravity disruptors to his airboat and was offering swamp tours with real anti-gravity action. See the Everglades like never. Before, only $25 per person, kids under 12 ride free. His business was booming, and he had reportedly started a waiting list that extended into the following month. The field reports flooding back to General Grimblesnacks painted a picture of military operations gone so far beyond sideways that they had entered an entirely new dimension of wrongness. His soldiers weren't being defeated by superior technology, advanced tactics, or overwhelming force. They were being systematically confused to death by a species that seemed to treat interdimensional warfare as nothing more than an amusing diversion, roughly equivalent to a crossword puzzle or weekend hobby project. "Sir," reported Captain Xylothorpe from what he optimistically described as his temporary tactical position, but which was actually a treehouse built by 8-year-olds, "the humans have constructed what they describe as a catapult, using materials they claim to have found in their garage. The device appears to be assembled from refuse, elastic bands, and a substance they call duct tape, which apparently can repair anything in the universe. They are using this weapon to launch what appears to be frozen poultry at our defensive positions. Our force shields are calibrated to repel energy weapons, projectile munitions, and directed plasma bursts, but nobody in the engineering department thought to program them against frozen chickens, traveling at subsonic velocity while spinning in aerodynamically impossible patterns. The situation reached what military historians would later classify as peak absurdity, when a human child, approximately 7 standard years old, and wearing what appeared to be a pink garment decorated with images of mythical equines, approached Clorthax the Bone Crusher, one of the most feared warriors in the Quilorian military, a battle-scarred veteran who had single-handedly destroyed 3 rebel strongholds, and once ate an enemy general's pet for breakfast, and politely asked if he would like to join their nerf war. Clorthax, not understanding what a nerf war might be, but recognizing what sounded like a formal challenge to single combat, accepted with all the dignity befitting his rank, his military decorations, and his fearsome reputation. He was subsequently pelted with foam projectiles by a coalition of 7-year-old humans until he retreated in complete defeat, muttering something about dishonorable tactics, weapons that tickle instead of kill, and the fundamental wrongness of being defeated by ammunition that bounces. Now, the entire engagement was recorded on devices the humans called smartphones, and was apparently transmitted across their global communication network within minutes, where it received 4 million likes, was converted into something called a meme, spawned 17 remix versions set to various musical arrangements, and turned Clorthax into what they described as internet famous, a concept that no one in the galactic military had encountered before and which seemed to cause more psychological damage than actual combat. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Craximus was discovering that the situation had escalated far beyond his most creative nightmares. The humans hadn't just defeated his invasion force, they had done something infinitely worse. They had adopted it. Half of his soldiers were now living in what humans called guest bedrooms, eating home-cooked meals prepared by beings who seemed genuinely concerned about whether they were getting enough vitamins and eating their vegetables. The other half were scattered across the planet, some helping with agricultural work, others participating in something called community theatre, and a disturbing number had been recruited into what appeared to be amateur sporting leagues. His most elite commando unit, soldiers trained from birth for stealth operations behind enemy lines, was reportedly learning to play something called baseball and had, according to their own field reports, become surprisingly competitive, though the strategic value of intentionally missing the ball remains a tactical mystery that defies conventional military logic. The final straw, the moment when Craximus realized that the universe had fundamentally shifted away from anything resembling sanity, came when he received a video communication from General Grimblesnacks himself. The proud military commander, whose service record included decorations for valor, tactical brilliance, and the successful subjugation of 12 separate planetary systems, was sitting at what appeared to be a wooden table covered in a checkered cloth, wearing something called a baseball cap, at an angle that suggested either casual comfort or complete psychological breakdown. In the background, small human offspring were teaching Quilorian soldiers to play what looked like a cooperative jumping game, while singing what could only be described as aggressively cheerful music. The soldiers, these same warriors who had once struck fear into the hearts of enemies across 3 galactic sectors, were participating with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. "Admiral," Grimblesnacks began, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had stared into the cosmic abyss and discovered it offering him homemade cookies and asking about his day, "I need to report that the mission parameters have evolved somewhat. The humans have made us what they describe as an offer we can't refuse. Though I should clarify that this was presented in the context of hospitality rather than threat. They wish to resolve our current situation through what they term competitive sporting activities rather than traditional warfare." "Sporting activities!" Craximus bellowed, causing his aide to drop a replacement stimulant beverage, which immediately began dissolving the floor with renewed enthusiasm. "Grimblesnacks, we are a military force, not a recreational social club. We don't resolve interstellar conflicts through games. We use overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority." "That's exactly what I told them, sir," Grimblesnacks replied, with the weary resignation of someone who had tried to explain military protocol to beings who thought war was totally not fun, and suggested doing something more interesting instead. But then they pointed out that sport is warfare, just with more complex rules and significantly better snacks. They explained that we'd been trying to conquer them through violence, which they described as inefficient, unnecessarily messy, and like, totally not cool, man. Instead, they proposed that we compete in what they claim is the most important game in the known universe. Craximus felt his sanity begin to slip away like water through his tentacles, taking with it several decades of military training and his basic understanding of how civilized species were supposed to interact. And what, by all the spinning moons of Arcturus, is this alleged most important game in the known universe? "They call it football, sir," Grimblesnacks replied, and even through the communication device, Craximus could hear the sound of his general's remaining grip on military reality cracking like thin ice. "However, they were very specific that we should understand it has absolutely nothing to do with using pedal extremities to manipulate the spherical object, except when it does, which is apparently most of the time, except during the occasions when it isn't, which are governed by rules so complex that they require trained officials to interpret them, and the officials frequently disagree with each other about what the rules actually mean." The explanation of football regulations took approximately 3 hours and left Craximus more confused than when the conversation had started. The humans had somehow created a recreational activity that involved 2 teams, attempting to transport an inflated animal skin from one end of a grass rectangle to the other, while following rules so Byzantine that they apparently required a separate category of specialists to interpret them, and the entire enterprise was considered so monumentally important that entire metropolitan areas would essentially cease functioning when it was being performed. But here was the detail that made Craximus's 3 hearts perform synchronized skip patterns. The humans had presented this proposition not as surrender, not as negotiation, not even as a desperate attempt to avoid annihilation, but as a challenge. They genuinely, sincerely believed that football represented a suitable replacement for interstellar warfare, and they were prepared to stake the freedom and independence of their entire planet on the outcome of a game that apparently nobody, including themselves, completely understood. "They want to organize a match," Grimblesnacks continued, his voice now carrying undertones of what could only be described as hysterical acceptance of the impossible. "Winner takes all. If we emerge victorious, we receive mining rights to their asteroid belt. Plus, they'll provide instruction in the creation of something called pizza, which appears to be a flatbread covered with cheese that somehow defies several fundamental laws of physics and is allegedly the pinnacle of culinary achievement. If they win, we agree to leave their planet unmolested, and they gain admission to what they describe as the galactic community, as equal partners rather than conquered subjects." "And if we decline their generous offer?" Craximus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would involve something terrible. Grimblesnacks was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of hollow tone usually reserved for survivors of cosmic disasters. "Sir, they were extremely polite about the whole thing, but they did mention almost as an afterthought while serving me something called sweet tea that could dissolve titanium, that they possess something called nuclear weapons, which they apparently developed just to see if they could, and have been manufacturing and stockpiling for decades as what they described as a hobby that got a little out of hand. And when I inquired about their total arsenal, a small human female with pigtails simply laughed in a way that made my combat instincts scream warnings, and said they had enough to make the whole solar system glow in the dark for about 1,000,000 years, give or take a few centuries, and then asked if I wanted more lemonade and cookies. Craximus stared at the communication screen with the expression of someone who had just been informed that the universe was actually a practical joke being played by cosmic entities with a seriously warped sense of humor. They had accidentally launched a military invasion against a planet full of beings who had developed weapons of mass destruction as a recreational activity, who genuinely believed that competitive sports represented an adequate substitute for interstellar warfare, and who offered refreshments while casually mentioning their capacity to sterilize entire star systems. These weren't primitive agriculturalists struggling with basic metallurgy. These were creatures so magnificently, terrifyingly optimistic that they had transformed the fundamental concept of mutual assured destruction into a social pastime, somehow made it work without actually destroying themselves, and then had the psychological fortitude to suggest resolving military conflicts through organized games while serving beverages. The decision to accept the challenge was simultaneously the most logical and most completely insane choice Craximus had ever been forced to make in his long military career. On one hand, they were facing a species that had casually mentioned possessing enough nuclear firepower to render their own solar system uninhabitable, while offering him homemade baked goods and asking about his dietary restrictions. On the other hand, they were being invited to resolve what was technically an interstellar incident through a recreational activity that involved running around a grass field while carrying an inflated pig bladder. The match was scheduled for the following week at something the humans called the Super Bowl, which they explained with tremendous enthusiasm was their most sacred sporting venue, a technological marvel capable of accommodating over 100,000 spectators simultaneously and broadcasting the event to every corner of their planet in real time. They seemed incredibly excited about the prospect of aliens versus humans being featured as what they called the halftime show, though nobody could adequately explain what exactly happened during the other halves. Craximus arrived on Earth expecting to encounter a primitive stadium filled with barbaric creatures howling for blood and violence. Instead, he discovered an architectural achievement that put most galactic sporting facilities to shame. Filled with beings who had painted their faces in team colors, were consuming vast quantities of something called beer that seemed to make them friendlier rather than more aggressive, and were singing coordinated songs that somehow made military conquest sound like an enjoyable weekend recreational activity. The atmosphere was unlike anything in his experience. These humans weren't treating this as a life-or-death struggle for planetary independence. They were treating it as the most entertaining thing that had happened to them in years. Vendors were selling something called hot dogs and nachos while wearing shirts that proclaimed Earth underdog champions of the galaxy. Children were running around wearing miniature replicas of human football uniforms alongside what appeared to be hastily constructed Quilorian military costumes, playing games that involved equal parts imagination and complete chaos. The human team had assembled what they claimed were their greatest athletes, beings with names like Thunder Rodriguez, Tank Williams, and the Refrigerator Johnson, who looked like they could bench press small moons and who welcomed the alien team with the kind of enthusiastic friendliness usually reserved for long-lost relatives returning from extended vacations. They seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity to play some ball with real aliens and kept asking questions about Quilorian anatomy that suggested they were already developing specialized tactics. The Quilorian team, meanwhile, consisted of soldiers who had spent their entire adult lives training for warfare involving energy weapons, gravitational manipulation, and strategic orbital bombardment, and were now attempting to understand why anyone would voluntarily throw themselves at each other while carrying a ball, when they could simply eliminate opponents from safe distances using advanced technology. Coach Murphy, Mad Dog O'Brien, a human whose resemblance to various predatory species was probably not coincidental, spent 3 hours explaining the basic concepts of American football to beings whose previous experience with recreational activities involved military exercises designed to prepare for actual combat. The explanation involved extensive use of visual aids, interpretive dance, and what appeared to be ritualistic shouting. "Now listen up, you alien fellas," Mad Dog announced, in a voice that could be heard in neighboring states. "Football is simple. You got 11 guys trying to move the ball that way, and 11 guys trying to stop them. Everything else is just details, and most of the details don't make sense anyway, so don't worry about it. Just hit whoever's got the ball, unless they don't have the ball. In which case, don't hit them unless they're about to get the ball, except when the ball isn't actually a ball, but a potential ball, and then you might want to hit them preemptively, but only if the referee isn't looking, and the referee is always looking, except when he's not." The pre-game ceremonies alone lasted longer than most interplanetary conflicts. There were marching bands, cheerleaders, aerial demonstrations, and something called the national anthem, which required everyone to stand perfectly still while a human female produced sounds so beautiful that several Quilorian soldiers began weeping openly, claiming they had never heard anything so moving in their entire lives. Then came the coin toss, a ritual that involved the team captains gathering at midfield while a referee flipped a small metal disc into the air. The entire stadium held its breath as if the fate of civilizations hung on whether the disc landed showing heads or tails. Craximus realized he was witnessing not just a game, but a religious ceremony disguised as entertainment. The game itself defied every expectation Craximus had ever developed about human civilization based on decades of intelligence reports. What he witnessed wasn't primitive barbarism or chaotic violence. Instead, he observed a complex tactical simulation that made traditional military strategy look like a children's puzzle. The humans moved with precision that rivaled elite military units, communicated through elaborate hand signals that suggested months of preparation, and executed plays that required split-second timing and perfect coordination between 11 individuals operating as a single, unified organism. And they accomplished all of this while 80,000 other humans screamed encouragement, criticism, and what appeared to be detailed tactical advice from the stands, creating a wall of sound that could probably be heard from orbit. The opening play set the tone for what would become known throughout the galaxy as the most ridiculous military engagement in recorded history. Human quarterback Johnny Lightning Martinez took the snap, dropped back, and unleashed what the commentators described as a perfect spiral that sailed through the air with the kind of mathematical precision usually associated with guided missiles. The Quilorian defense, despite their superior physical strength, advanced technology, and extensive military training, found themselves completely unprepared for beings who had spent their entire lives perfecting the art of controlled violence as entertainment. Every time they thought they had figured out the humans' tactical patterns, the opposition would execute something called a trick play that violated every assumption about logical strategic progression. "They're using deception as a primary tactical doctrine," Captain Xylithorpe reported from the sidelines, his voice carrying a mixture of professional admiration and existential horror. "They're making us think they're going to do one thing, then doing something completely different. It's like they've weaponized lying." The first quarter ended with humans leading 14-3, but the score was less important than what Craximus was learning about human psychology. These beings had somehow created a framework that allowed them to engage in aggressive competition without actually trying to destroy each other. They hit each other with tremendous force, then helped each other up. They celebrated successful plays, then immediately began planning how to counter them. They treated their opponents as enemies during the game and friends during the breaks between plays. During halftime, something even more extraordinary happened. Instead of using the intermission to regroup and plan tactical adjustments, both teams gathered together for what appeared to be a social gathering. Human and Quilorian players shared something called Gatorade, exchanged stories about their respective worlds, and compared notes on effective blocking techniques. Several alien soldiers were invited to meet the players' families, who treated them like honored guests rather than invaders from outer space. Mrs. Rodriguez, mother of quarterback Johnny Lightning, insisted on showing photos of her son's childhood football achievements to General Grimblesnacks, while force-feeding him homemade tamales and explaining the difference between high school, college, and professional football. The general, who had conquered star systems and reduced enemy strongholds to smoking craters, found himself nodding politely and making appropriate appreciative noises about pictures of 12-year-old humans in oversized helmets. The second half of the game demonstrated why humans had become the dominant species on their planet. When faced with a superior opponent, they didn't surrender or retreat. They adapted. The human team began incorporating elements they had observed from Quilorian military tactics, while simultaneously teaching their alien opponents the finer points of zone coverage and play-action passes. The turning point came in the fourth quarter, when the score was tied 31-31 with 2 minutes remaining on the clock. Human coach Mad Dog O'Brien called a timeout and gathered his team in a huddle. From the stands, Craximus could hear him delivering what appeared to be a motivational speech involving numerous references to honor, determination, and something called giving it 110%, which, mathematically impossible, but seemed to inspire tremendous enthusiasm. The Quilorian team, not to be outdone, formed their own huddle, where General Grimblesnacks attempted to apply traditional military motivational techniques to football strategy. The results were mixed, as concepts like overwhelming firepower and acceptable casualty rates didn't translate well to a sport where the objective was to score points rather than eliminate opponents. With 47 seconds left on the clock, Johnny Lightning Martinez executed what sports commentators would later describe as the most beautiful spiral pass in the history of interspecies competition. The ball sailed through the air in a perfect arc that seemed to defy gravity, wind resistance, and several other laws of physics before landing precisely in the hands of wide receiver Tommy "Rocket" Washington, who had somehow anticipated exactly where it would be 3 seconds before it was thrown. The stadium erupted. 80,000 humans leaped to their feet simultaneously, producing a sound that registered on seismic equipment in 3 neighboring states and briefly interfered with orbital communication satellites. But this wasn't the primitive roar of bloodthirsty savages celebrating violence. This was something far more sophisticated. The collective expression of joy by beings who had just witnessed the successful demonstration of coordinated human excellence. Craximus found himself on his feet along with everyone else, cheering for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. These weren't primitive warriors celebrating the defeat of enemies. These were sophisticated beings experiencing shared euphoria over the successful completion of an incredibly complex task that required perfect timing, absolute trust, and flawless execution under pressure. The final score was humans 38, Quilorians 31, but the numbers were irrelevant compared to what happened next. As the game ended, something extraordinary occurred that would reshape Craximus's understanding of intelligent life throughout the universe. The human players didn't gloat over their victory against a superior alien military force. They didn't celebrate their dominance or mock their defeated opponents. Instead, they invited the entire Quilorian team to join them for something called the Victory Dinner, where they proceeded to demonstrate the fine art of pizza consumption, beer appreciation, and something called trash-talking, which apparently involved insulting each other in ways designed to be amusing rather than offensive. General Grimblesnacks found himself seated next to human linebacker Marcus the Wall Johnson, a being roughly the size of a small building who was patiently explaining the ongoing cultural debate regarding pineapple as a pizza topping. According to Marcus, this was either the greatest culinary innovation in human history or a crime against nature and all that is holy, depending entirely on which geographical region of the planet you happen to be from, and the disagreement had been going on for decades, without anyone actually declaring war over it. The conversation somehow evolved into a detailed comparison of military tactics, where both species realized they had been approaching warfare from completely different philosophical foundations. The Quilorians fought to win quickly and decisively. The humans fought because the process itself was engaging, challenging, and somehow fun, even when people got hurt. "You guys fight to end fights," Marcus observed, gesturing with a slice of pepperoni pizza in a way that suggested he was making a profound philosophical point. "We fight because fighting is interesting. That's why you're better at the actual winning and losing part, but we're better at all the stuff that happens while you're fighting, like strategy and teamwork and making sure everybody has a good time even when they're getting their butts kicked." No, the implications struck Craximus like a gravitational wave carrying the fundamental secrets of the universe. Humans had somehow evolved beyond the need to prove dominance through destruction. They had managed to channel their aggressive instincts into competitive frameworks that produced excellence, cooperation, and entertainment simultaneously, rather than death and conquest. They were, in their own magnificently bizarre way, the most advanced civilization he had ever encountered. But the story didn't end with dinner and philosophical revelations about the nature of competition. The aftermath of what Earth historians would later call the Great Football Challenge of 2387 reshaped the entire galactic political landscape in ways that nobody had anticipated and most beings still couldn't quite believe. Other alien civilizations, upon hearing about a primitive agricultural species that had defeated a superior military force through recreational activities, began dispatching diplomatic missions to Earth to learn more about these revolutionary competitive resolution protocols. Within 3 months, Earth had become the unofficial arbitration center for interstellar disputes, with conflicts being resolved through various human sporting events rather than traditional warfare. The Rigelians and the Centaurians, who had been engaged in a 300-year territorial war over mining rights to a cluster of asteroid fields, resolved their differences through a basketball tournament that lasted 6 weeks and was broadcast to 14 star systems. The final game went into triple overtime and was decided by a 3-point shot that became known throughout the galaxy as the shot heard round the universe. The Vegan Empire and the Sirius Confederacy settled their complex trade disagreements through what humans called the World Series, which turned out to be a baseball competition that somehow involved teams from only one world, but was nevertheless considered the pinnacle of sporting achievement. The 7-game series required extensive explanation of concepts like designated hitters, infield fly rules, and the curse of the Bambino, none of which made any sense to non-humans, but which were apparently crucial to understanding the sport. Most remarkably, the notoriously aggressive Arcturus battle fleets, whose idea of diplomacy had previously involved orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion, became enthusiastic participants in something called Monday Night Football, which appeared to involve more strategic complexity and tactical planning than most military campaigns, plus significantly better snacks and more entertaining commentary. The transformation wasn't limited to conflict resolution. Human sports became a galactic phenomenon, with alien species adapting Earth games to their own physiological capabilities and cultural preferences. The 6-limbed inhabitants of Proxima Centauri developed a version of basketball that involved simultaneous offensive and defensive strategies that boggled human observers. The aquatic species from the Tau Ceti system created an underwater variant of football that required players to coordinate 3-dimensional movements while maintaining perfect buoyancy control. Craximus found himself promoted to the newly created position of Ambassador of Sporting Diplomacy, a role that hadn't existed 6 months earlier and now carried more political influence than most traditional military commands. His office was relocated to Earth, where he spent his days mediating disputes between species who had previously resolved disagreements through conquest and annihilation, but now preferred to settle matters through competitive events that produced winners and losers without requiring anybody to die. His daily routine involved activities he never could have imagined during his military career. Mornings were spent reviewing game footage with alien coaches who were developing new strategies for upcoming tournaments. Afternoons involved diplomatic meetings that frequently took place in sports bars while watching replays of particularly impressive plays. Evenings were dedicated to writing reports for the Galactic Council that attempted to explain concepts like home field advantage, playoff seeding, and the importance of having heart, to beings who had no previous cultural framework for understanding competitive entertainment. The most challenging part of his new role was explaining human sports terminology to species who had never encountered recreational competition. Trying to describe concepts like sudden death over time, Hail Mary passes, and the 2-minute warning to beings who approached language with mathematical precision led to translation problems that sometimes resulted in minor diplomatic incidents. The Betelgeusians, whose culture was based on precise logical analysis, became convinced that sudden death was a literal execution method and refused to participate until Craximus spent 3 days explaining that it was simply a way of determining winners in tied games. The crystalline beings from Alpha Centauri interpreted Hail Mary as a religious invocation and began incorporating elaborate spiritual ceremonies into their pre-game rituals, which actually improved their performance significantly. But the most significant discovery came 8 months after the Great Football Challenge, when xenobiologists studying human behavioral patterns made a revelation that fundamentally altered galactic understanding of Earth civilization. Humans hadn't developed sports as a civilized substitute for warfare. They had developed warfare as an unfortunate substitute for sports that had gotten out of control. Their entire military history, when viewed through this new perspective, was essentially the story of beings who loved competition so intensely that they kept accidentally turning games into actual conflicts, then spent centuries developing increasingly sophisticated methods for turning armed conflicts back into games. Every major war in human history could be traced back to competitions that had escalated beyond entertainment into violence, followed by peace treaties that essentially established rules for future competition. The revelation explained why humans were so naturally gifted at both warfare and sports, why they treated military strategy like an intellectual game, and why they were able to transition so easily from invasion to football. They had been practicing for thousands of years, gradually perfecting the art of channeling aggressive competition into frameworks that produced excellence without requiring anybody to actually die. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the lead xenobiologist on the project, summarized the findings in a report that became required reading at diplomatic academies throughout the galaxy. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to compete without destroying each other. Every sport they've invented is essentially a controlled simulation of warfare with safety protocols and victory conditions that produce winners and losers without requiring casualties. They've solved the fundamental problem of intelligent life: how to satisfy the competitive drive without eliminating the competition. The implications were staggering. If humans could teach other species how to channel aggression into entertainment, the galaxy could potentially eliminate warfare entirely, replacing it with competitive frameworks that satisfied the need to prove superiority without requiring anybody to die in the process. Implementation wasn't without challenges. The warlike Klingons from the Gamma Quadrant initially refused to participate in any activity that didn't involve actual bloodshed until they discovered American football and realized that it was essentially warfare with more rules and better medical coverage. They became enthusiastic participants, though their version of the game involved significantly more aggressive tackling and trash-talking that sometimes required translation software to prevent actual diplomatic incidents. The peaceful Vulcans, conversely, found human sports puzzlingly emotional and irrational until they discovered chess and realized that humans had also developed competitive activities based purely on intellectual strategy. They became obsessed with creating hybrid games that combined physical and mental challenges, resulting in sports that were incomprehensible to most other species, but which satisfied their need for logical competition. 12 months after first contact, Craximus submitted his final report to the Galactic Council, a document that would become the foundation for interstellar diplomatic policy for the next several centuries. The humans of Sol 3 have achieved something that our greatest military strategists and political philosophers never imagined possible. They have rendered warfare obsolete by making it entertaining. They have transformed the fundamental biological drive to compete and dominate into frameworks that produce excellence, cooperation, and mutual enjoyment simultaneously. They are not primitive beings who have stumbled accidentally upon an alternative to violence. They are the most sophisticated civilization we have encountered, so advanced that they have solved the basic problem of intelligent life: how to satisfy aggressive instincts without destroying the objects of competition. Every species we have encountered has developed technology, art, philosophy, and military strategy. Only humans have developed the concept of competitive entertainment as a replacement for conquest. They have weaponized fun, and the results are more devastating to traditional warfare than any military innovation in galactic history. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the human influence on galactic civilization was how quickly other species adapted to competitive entertainment as a way of life. Within 18 months, the Galactic Council had established the Interstellar Sports Commission, with headquarters on Earth and branch offices on 47 different worlds. The annual Galaxy Bowl became the most watched event in recorded history, featuring teams representing different star systems, competing in a tournament that combined elements from dozens of different sports traditions. The rules were so complex that they required a separate manual, but the basic concept was simple: prove your species' superiority through competitive excellence rather than military conquest. Earth became the unlikely center of galactic civilization, not because humans had conquered anyone, but because they had taught everyone how to have fun while competing. The planet's economy was transformed from agricultural production to what economists termed recreational diplomacy, exporting sports equipment, coaching expertise, and something called stadium design consultation to civilizations across the galaxy. The cultural exchange worked both ways. Humans discovered that they had barely scratched the surface of competitive possibilities. The Arcturians introduced them to three-dimensional chess played in zero gravity. The aquatic species from Tau Ceti taught them underwater rugby that required players to hold their breath while executing complex tactical maneuvers. The energy beings from the Vega system created competitive activities that involved manipulating electromagnetic fields in patterns so beautiful that spectators often wept while watching. But the most popular import was something the Andromedans called probability sports, games where the rules changed randomly during play, requiring competitors to adapt their strategies in real time while maintaining perfect coordination with teammates who were facing the same constantly shifting challenges. Humans took to these games with the enthusiasm they had previously reserved for warfare, and within months had developed variations that were considered impossibly complex by species with superior intellects. The transformation wasn't universal. Some civilizations refused to participate in what they considered frivolous entertainment, preferring traditional methods of conquest and domination. But these holdouts found themselves increasingly isolated as the rest of the galaxy discovered that competitive sports produced more satisfaction, better diplomatic relationships, and significantly lower casualty rates than traditional warfare. The Dominion of Rigel, which had built its empire through military conquest, discovered that their subject species were defecting to join sports leagues rather than serve in military campaigns. When they attempted to reassert control through traditional warfare, they found themselves facing coalitions of species who had learned teamwork, strategic thinking, and coordinated tactics through competitive sports, making them far more effective military opponents than they had been as individual conquered territories. The irony wasn't lost on military historians. Sports had made warfare obsolete by making everyone better at it. Species who learned to coordinate perfectly in competitive environments naturally applied those same skills to actual conflicts, creating military alliances so effective that traditional conquest became practically impossible. Craximus's successor, Admiral Zephylonia Quiblik, inherited a galaxy where the phrase sports diplomacy was no longer considered an oxymoron, but rather the foundation of interstellar relations. Her quarterly reports to the Galactic Council read like summaries of sporting events rather than military briefings. The Centauri basketball finals resulted in a trade agreement for rare minerals. The Vegan baseball playoffs established new shipping routes through the Horsehead Nebula. The Arcturus football championship led to a mutual defense pact between 7 star systems. Casualties, 0. Diplomatic objectives, exceeded. Recommendation: expand stadium capacity on 12 additional worlds. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was what sociologists called the humanization of competition. Other species began adopting human concepts like good sportsmanship, playing fair, and it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. These ideas, which had seemed naive to civilizations built on conquest and domination, gradually became the foundation for a new type of galactic culture. The idea that competition could be enjoyable for both winners and losers, that opponents could be respected rather than eliminated, and that the process of competing could be as important as the final outcome, revolutionized how intelligent species interacted with each other. 24 months after the Great Football Challenge, the galaxy had been transformed from a collection of militaristic civilizations competing for dominance through conquest into a confederation of species competing for excellence through organized sports. Wars didn't disappear entirely, but they became rare, brief, and were generally resolved through negotiated sporting competitions rather than prolonged military campaigns. The ultimate vindication of human sporting philosophy came when the most warlike species in the galaxy, the infamous Borg Collective, announced their intention to assimilate Earth and add human biological and technological distinctiveness to their own. The humans' response was to challenge them to what they called the ultimate Super Bowl, with the winner taking permanent possession of the loser's territory and technology. The Borg, being a collective intelligence focused entirely on efficiency and perfection, approached football as they approached everything else, through complete analysis, perfect coordination, and absolute determination to win. They studied every human football game ever played, analyzed every possible strategic variation, and developed tactics so sophisticated that they were essentially playing a different sport than anyone had seen before. The humans, meanwhile, approached the challenge with their characteristic combination of strategic planning and absolute confidence in their ability to adapt to anything the universe might throw at them. They assembled what they called the All-Galaxy Dream Team, featuring the best players from Earth alongside alien athletes who had mastered human sports, creating a squad that represented the pinnacle of interspecies competitive cooperation. The game itself lasted 6 hours, went into quadruple overtime, and featured plays so spectacular that they were studied by sports analysts for decades afterward. The final score was irrelevant. What mattered was that by the end of the game, the Borg had discovered something they had never experienced before: the joy of competition for its own sake. The collective mind that had previously existed only to assimilate and dominate found itself enjoying the process of competing against worthy opponents who challenged them to excellence without requiring destruction or conquest. For the first time in their existence, they experienced what humans called fun. The Borg didn't surrender or withdraw their threat to assimilate Earth. Instead, they did something unprecedented in their history. They asked to join the galactic sports leagues as regular participants rather than conquerors. They wanted to compete against other species, not to defeat and absorb them, but to experience more of this strange new sensation of enjoying challenge and competition. The transformation of the galaxy's most feared species, from conquest-focused assimilators into enthusiastic sports participants, marked the final victory of human competitive philosophy over traditional warfare. If beings programmed for absolute efficiency and domination could learn to value the process of competition over the outcome of conquest, then any species could make the same transition. Craximus, now serving as senior ambassador of galactic sports diplomacy, submitted what would be his final official report to the Galactic Council. Mission status: success beyond all possible parameters. We initially dispatched a military force to secure mining rights from a primitive agricultural species. Instead, we discovered a civilization so advanced that they have solved the fundamental problem of intelligent existence: how to compete without destroying. The humans have taught us that the greatest victory is not defeating your opponents, but creating opponents worthy of competing against. They have shown us that the highest form of dominance is inspiring others to excellence rather than reducing them to submission. They have weaponized joy, militarized fun, and turned entertainment into the most effective diplomatic tool in galactic history. The universe is now a more competitive, more challenging, and infinitely more interesting place than it was before we accidentally invaded their planet. Recommendation: immediate establishment of permanent sporting diplomatic relations with all inhabited worlds. Secondary recommendation: emergency deployment of popcorn and beverage concession stands to all military installations, as traditional warfare appears to have been replaced by organized spectatorship. Final note: the humans have extended an invitation for all galactic species to participate in something they call March Madness, which apparently involves 68 teams competing in a single elimination tournament that somehow drives entire civilizations temporarily insane with excitement. Preliminary analysis suggests this may be the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare ever developed. The galaxy will never be the same. Whether this represents progress or the most elaborate practical joke in cosmic history remains to be determined. In a small town in Ohio, Crazy Eddie was still offering swamp tours with anti-gravity technology, now expanded to include authentic alien pilot training, learn to fly like a professional Quilorian, and interdimensional airboat racing for beginners. His business had grown into a major tourist attraction, and he had become the unofficial Earth ambassador to the growing community of retired alien military officers who had decided that Florida represented the perfect combination of climate, recreational opportunities, and complete indifference to the bizarre. The greatest testament to the success of human sporting diplomacy was that nobody could quite figure out whether they had conquered the galaxy through competitive entertainment, or whether the galaxy had conquered them by turning everyone into sports fans. But everyone agreed that the food was better, the entertainment was more exciting, and significantly fewer people were dying in military conflicts. And somewhere in the cosmic bureaucracy that managed interstellar affairs, a file was quietly updated. Sol System, third planet. Status changed from primitive agricultural species to advanced recreational civilization. Approach with caution, bring snacks, and be prepared to learn new games.